it's all about money. With your host, CPA and forensic accountant, Sam Rosenfarb.
You're watching It's All About Money, and nobody knows more about money than accountants. Hi, I'm Sam Rosenfarb. I'm a forensic accountant. I've been an accountant for over 30 years, and I can tell you from experience that most people are motivated in most aspects of their lives by money. I've been involved in numerous disputes about money, brothers and sisters fighting about how to split up the money left them by their parents. Husbands and wives fighting the War of the Roses after living together for many years. This show is all about educating you, teaching you about all of the financial aspects of life around us, how you can spend, invest, control, and maintain money and its proper place in your life. This show deals with certain aspects of employment and labor law and other kinds of law. What is discrimination in the workplace? What is sexual harassment? We'll explore these areas and others, including the cost of these lawsuits, the cost to business, to government, and to you. Here to discuss these issues are two of New Jersey's foremost experts in employment law. Paul Weiner, senior partner of Weiner & Associates, law firm in West Orange, New Jersey. He's practiced labor law for 27 years. Also with us is Phil Stern, who concentrates his law practice in the areas of commercial litigation, zoning, and real estate transactions from his Millburn, New Jersey office. Paul, is there a lot of wrongful discrimination in the workplace?
That's an understatement. I think we're seeing an explosion of lawsuits in the workplace. In the last 10 years, we've seen an increase of 2,000% in the number of lawsuits.
2,000%?
Right.
What's fueled?
Well, some accountant gave me that number, by the way. I don't understand.
Well, you can't trust those percentages through accountants.
Right.
What's causing all of these lawsuits? What's fueling it?
Well, fueling it. We've had 10 years of very active 10 years, maybe more. 10 years of active legislation on employee rights, and we've had courts in the state of New Jersey, which I guess we're talking mostly about, who have liberally construed employee rights, and we've had tremendous number of companies laying off and redistributing employees constantly in the last 10 years. All of that lending to, and a weakening of the money that the government is putting into some of these agencies that investigate employment practice issues,
and so
like the EEOC and the National Labor Relations Board and those places.
How does the lack of funds cause the increased litigation?
And it's a real problem, by the way. They say, we'll cut back here, so what happens is the employer lands up getting hit with more lawsuits. What happens is if you had an active Equal Employment Opportunity Commission which was funded and had enough employees, they would be able to handle a greater number of discrimination complaints in the workplace. Same is also true for the New Jersey Civil Rights Division, who does the same thing. I think they're down to like 50 employees for the whole state.
And because they don't have the funding, that process is left to litigation?
It's left, well, if you go into these agencies and the thing sits there for 2 years, you become a frustrated person, nothing happens, and you'll end up going to court. You have that option. You don't have to go to the agency. You can go to the court.
Phil, you're involved in other kinds of litigation in your law practice. What other kind of litigation do you handle?
Well, with respect to the labor area, I get more involved in the area of employers who are not providing their disabled employees with appropriate accommodations, which can range from a variety of type of accommodations to perhaps a cashier who has sciatica and just needs a stool to sit on.
And the employer is required to give them a stool?
It depends, and these cases all come down to being really very fact sensitive, and that's where the disputes come over, not so much what the law is or how the law should be applied.
I remember seeing a Seinfeld episode where George wanted to give one of the guards in a retail store a stool. He felt sorry for him, and so he argued with the employer, and finally they gave him a stool, and the guard couldn't get up from the stool fast enough to prevent a holdup. So poor George, he was left out in the cold.
That's not because he had a handicap. It's because he was tired.
He was tired.
That's a little different.
How did you get involved in employment law?
How did I get involved? It's so long ago I can't really know. I always
I said the opening 27 years. Not
20. It's really 28 or 29. I don't know. I lost count. But what occurred is I started in labor law with the active, with the unions and representing unions and management. I worked for a firm that represented both sides, which is insane.
That's unusual.
It's
right?
schizophrenic.
Right.
It's really crazy. But it was a great way to learn. Labor law was a very, very big area. It's still a big area, but after that, of course, all these other employee legislations came in, and unions became less active in the private workplace. So,
But unions are becoming more and more popular today, right?
I think employers out there are watching, and employees. I think we're seeing a complete new renaissance with unions. First of all, in the public sector, they're tremendous. You got a tremendous number of unions in New Jersey's public sector.
Do you think this UPS strike increased the recognition of unions, or decreased it? Or did
Absolutely,
it
no, it did increase it. I think
they were successful.
They were perceived to be successful, and that is a real plus for unions. So I think employers today are going to see more and more attempts of unionization in their workplace, and they haven't seen in years.
Phil, you're involved in representing children who need special education and representing them in litigation. Tell us about that.
Well, this is really a burgeoning area because there's been more litigation, and the courts are recognizing the need for children to be protected.
What's the litigation about? What do these kids need that they're not getting?
Well, really what it comes down to is a systemic problem of a perceived lack of resources or a unwillingness to commit resources by school districts.
I mean, the school just doesn't have the money to pay for, what is it that what these children need? What is it that they need?
It can range for a lot of things, occupational therapy, physical therapy, providing them with, in certain cases, special equipment, as well as resources.
For those physically handicapped children?
For a physically handicapped child would be involved more in the technological area, but also children who might have some slow developments, usually in the earlier ages.
Does this ADD classify as one of those, right?
Yeah. ADD is a funny,
seems like
funny
half
sort
the
of thing.
kids in school have ADD.
That's right.
Right?
It's certainly it's become in vogue.
In vogue, right.
In terms of citing it, there's been the medical community has gone back and forth in terms of trying to define what constitutes ADD and ADHD.
What is ADHD?
That's hyper.
But isn't some of these schools actually you can get them to actually pay for private school?
Well, what happens is if they can't provide the services, if they can't provide the services, actually there are circumstances where a parent can go out and get the services privately and obtain reimbursement, or have the school make the placement. Certainly if you have a severely handicapped child, there are special schools. A child can't be placed in a regular school setting.
So what's the point of the lawsuit then?
Why? Actually what happens is, it's unbelievable what will happen in some cases. I had a case where we actually had one of the personnel in the school system cutting and pasting a parent's signature from a sign-in sheet onto a plan adopted by them.
Adopted by the school board?
Well, not by the school board, but a plan for the services to be provided for a particular child. On the basis of just filing that complaint in federal court, there was a substantial sum that was put.
Bring us back for a minute. Why would a parent need to sign it off on a plan for a child? My children went to school. I never signed off.
Well, what happens when a child is within the area that is entitled to some type of services?
How would a parent know if the child is entitled to
Good
services?
question. We have laws dating back to the 70s. Excuse me. Sorry. Which come from the federal government, and says if you're going to take our funds, you got to provide services for students who, because of their handicap, that interferes with their ability to learn, and so you have to provide them with some service so that they can learn. And what happens in these circumstances is the school districts have an affirmative obligation under the federal law to actually seek out children between the ages of 3 and 21 to provide them services, and when they actually enter.
So if your child is in school and can't learn, he is required to obtain these additional services by federal mandate?
By federal mandate, assuming that it's attributable to some sort of either physical, psychological, emotional, or social maladjustment.
What else could it be attributable to? If it's, I mean, that covers a whole bunch of stuff, right?
Some children don't have the capacity to learn.
At all? Yeah,
At
without
all.
any deficiency?
Right. In other words, if the provision of services are not going to make the child or enhance the child's ability to learn, then
So if they need special tutoring to learn, that has to be provided by federal mandate.
You know, this covers everything, a very broad range. Everything from, you may have seen those three-sided rubberized pencil holders that go on, slip onto a pencil.
Right.
So for a child, when they're learning to write, it makes it easier for them. For a child who may have fine motor skill under development, that may be the kind of thing.
I see. So you're saying if the school system isn't providing these special services to your child who's incapable of learning without them, then you could bring the school system to court.
Exactly.
You could bring them to court and force them to make good. And can you get punitive damages as well?
Punitive damages are available when the school system has willfully refused, and that does make up a major component of it. And you get into a more difficult area in the compensatory damages, because if you have a child who maybe have been deprived services for 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and now all of a sudden you force the school to provide those services, they may say, look, we're providing those for free, and we're going to get your child up to speed by the time they graduate or within a couple of years.
Boy, that's fascinating. Do we have similar provisions in the workplace?
There's a common theme here. In the workplace, when you're dealing with disabled people under the Americans with Disabilities Act, as you know,
what is the Americans
with Disabilities Act is a federal law that protects disabled employees at the workplace and requires that the employer make reasonable accommodations for that employee, as long as it's not an undue hardship to the company, and that the employee is disabled under the law.
Did I read right recently that depression could be a disability?
Yes. As a matter of fact, the EOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
I've been in business for 30 years. I don't know of an employee who's not depressed, right?
Well, especially when they get fired.
Right.
You know, I mean, they really get depressed.
Right. So
that's
depression could be a disability.
Yes, absolutely. But the interesting thing is when an employer has to make these reasonable accommodations, which could be equipment, could be a stool, but a lot of times it could be expensive things.
Absolutely.
Like a computer for someone who was cannot see, was blind. They have special computers for that, you know, braille computers and all that.
So that gets
by the
expensive.
way, very expensive. From a monetary point of view, there are tax credits you can get for that, which you're probably aware of.
Right.
But I just wanted to let other people know that their employers can get tax credits.
But the important part for our viewers is they can force their employers to provide these special benefits, and they could force their school systems to provide these special benefits to their students.
Absolutely.
That's what's real important.
You know, despite the adage about sometimes the way the law is, the law in this area really does have a modifying effect, which is the employee still has to be otherwise qualified to perform the functions of their job. The disability can't, you know, an employer, there is a sense of reason to this.
With the specific accommodation.
Sure.
I mean, if they're qualified after that, yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
And so it's really to provide assistance.
So what does that mean, an undue hardship? You said undue hardship.
Well, this is where we get the accountants involved.
Well,
and
great.
the forensic accountants,
well, that's very important.
We
because
really
we want to make work for all the forensic accountants.
This is where, seriously, they take the economic structure of the company generally in that particular facility. Now, if it's a small company, it's that whole company. And
well, what if it's just Bob's Deli?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's limits.
Bob's Deli, he's got 3 employees.
You know, I mean, he doesn't have to get an automated slicing machine, which costs $15,000.
He doesn't.
No.
But if you're
forget about it.
But Supermarkets General might have to.
They'd have to get everything.
That's right.
And it's very hard.
You know,
we'll be back in just a minute talking about employment and student discrimination with Paul Weiner and Phil Stern. Just a moment.
Our viewer response line highlights the award-winning programs that air on TV3 by dialing 297-5973 any time of the day and any day of the week.
He's got the ball again. Let's listen to them. They're incredible.
The water rate has clearly gone up.
No lawyer wants a case to go on for 5 years.
Right.
Hi, and welcome to Bridgeport. I'm your host.
I guess you're ready to take a ride on the fire truck now.
Call us with your questions at 733.
Remember, your comments and suggestions are important to us. Please leave your message at the end of the recording.
Yeah, hi. I watched the show on Channel 3 at 7:30.
Cablevision's TV3 and the Viewer Response Line, your source for the best of local programming. Call 297-5973.
Hi, we're back with Phil Stern and Paul Weiner talking about areas of interest in the law relating to labor and student and educational law. Phil, tell us about one of your most interesting cases. You know, you've been practicing for a while.
Yeah, well, I was starting to tell you before about we were talking about this situation in a school district in New Jersey. You know, dealing with a parent who's obviously concerned about their child, and we were able to...
It was a child who needed special attention?
Special attention, and actually, you know, the kinds of things that were happening were really affecting the child's self-esteem. And what ended up happening was really on the basis of just filing a complaint. We didn't even get through discovery.
What was wrong with the child?
The child had some perceptual impairment relating in an audiological area. Had trouble sitting on a seat, handling gross motor skills. For example, some of the things that were in the accommodation area. You know, in grammar school, you remember getting the tests, and there was the answer box, and your answer had to be in the answer box.
Right.
Well, there's a child who physically could not keep his answer within the answer box. Well,
he couldn't see.
It's not a matter of conceit, it's a matter of control of his arm and his hand, and to the motor skills in terms of putting the answer in. Well, certainly a child like that who knows the information and can provide the information, but simply doesn't have the physical ability to keep it within the box, shouldn't be penalized for that. So there's a whole elaborate procedural framework of evaluation and implementation of a plan, and I mentioned a plan before, in order to accommodate a child like that. If a child like that is constantly getting D's and F's because his answers are outside the box, and then...
Or he colored outside the line.
Exactly.
When I was a kid, you had to color within a line, I remember that.
That's going to affect the child's self-esteem to think that, you know, to see that he's constantly getting low grades. And what happened was the district came in and was prepared to pay a substantial amount, which was put aside for this child, for the child's benefit, for the future, for his education. And that was very gratifying for me.
The school system was required to put aside money for the child for the future.
Absolutely.
Not only to provide this special education, but to give him
on
money.
To compensate him for the loss. I mean, in the
damages? I mean,
damages, exactly. Like in a personal injury case. I mean, think about a personal injury, a broken arm.
Right.
You don't just the plaintiff doesn't just recover for the medical expenses for getting and the physical therapy for getting his arm back,
the accident
but also for the loss
and suffering.
Right, and in the same way, if when you can show, I mean, obviously you need the appropriate experts in terms of a psychologist to come in to be able to.
So you represented this child who not only was able to get these additional services, but got paid actual compensation, money
for the deprivation of those services prior to when the school system was obligated as a matter of law.
How many years was the child deprived of these services?
There was about 2.5 years, but this was a young child, and you know, 2.5 years for a 7-year-old is a lot longer than it is for you or I.
And was it necessary that these parents had a lot of money to pay for legal fees and experts?
Well, actually, legal fees would be recoverable. I mean, we ended up settling it, so that was part of the mix in terms of deciding what was a fair settlement.
Well, I know, for instance, most accident cases are handled by attorneys on a contingency basis, which means the plaintiff doesn't pay anything if there's no recovery, and that whatever the lawyer's fees are received from the recovery. Is that true of these kinds of cases as well, generally?
Well, they can be handled that way. There's actually not that many yet that have come about. The case that controls New Jersey, and it came out of the Third Circuit about 2 years ago, that really said, go ahead with this. There's actually a split amongst the federal circuit courts on the ability to collect compensatory and punitive damages, and we happen to be in a circuit that believes that that is an appropriate remedy when these deprivations are willful or because of reckless disregard to the interest of children.
Boy, that's
At
fascinating.
some point, it's going to get into the Supreme Court.
Right.
You know,
That's-
Absolutely.
In the employment end, there is no, as in the public sector, there's no deep. I mean, there's a deep pocket in some big companies and some organizations, but it's not an endless number. And
But I guess these school districts have all the
They have-
unlimited funds.
right,
They have
well-
the ability to tax.
right.
Right.
Which,
Well,
How's all these affirmative action lawsuits affecting the operations of business?
I think there's been a terrible overreaction to affirmative action and
Overreaction by who?
By people who think it's it's a freebie for certain groups. That isn't true, but there is this very important new case that's going up to the Supreme Court of New Jersey involving I think it was the teachers, a black and a white teacher, and the black teacher got the job and the white teacher was laid off. It was a layoff.
Right.
And they were both equally qualified, and they laid off the white teacher.
So the
Now
white teacher sued?
Yeah, and that's going up to argument at the Supreme Court, I think, in January, in a few months, in '98. And it's going to have some major ramifications throughout this state and maybe the country. But affirmative
what could it
action.
affect? What
could it
kind of
affect?
ramifications
Well,
could result?
it could impact in the ability of, well, public sector especially. This is a public sector. Affirmative action is...
Public sector, you mean
meaning
government rather than
and
private?
Private, not all employers have to have affirmative action. That's a mistake. Only employers who do business with the federal government and the state government, and they're over 50 employees.
You mean the Kmarts of the world don't have to have affirmative action?
Well, they may, because they may have something in a... They may have a store in a government in a base, for example.
A
but
Navy base.
They
or
may
Army.
not. They may not. But not all private employers have to have affirmative action. But public employers, they all do. Anyone who receives money from the government, the universities have affirmative action.
So the federal government, the state government, they have to have
right.
affirmative action.
And this could, there's been a backlash on this issue because, the non-protected people are saying the other protected people are getting something extra. That's not true. What it is it's only if both people are theoretically equal in their abilities, and there is a need for further representation in that group for minorities or women.
Right.
Then you have an issue. There's a pending bill in the state.
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey, to outlaw affirmative action, just as is in California recently. I was on a radio show with the assemblyman who backed that, and we had a big debate about it. And I don't think it was a slam dunk for him or me either. But there's a lot of
What's the debate about? He wants to remove affirmative action.
I said to him during the debate, and I'm not mentioning who it is, that and he was stumped at this one. Women are also covered under employment affirmative action plans. That's half the voting population. All of a sudden, he started stammering, saying, "Well, I'm just talking about." And he had a limited view of what affirmative action is. It involves national origin, involves, Hispanics, and of course blacks and other minorities.
But it does include women.
And women are very much a part of it. We write affirmative action plans for employers who are covered under it in our firm.
You mean your law firm?
We help them. It's a complicated. You got to. But it basically comes out where you have an underrepresentation of a particular group, then you have you have to make a good faith effort to put minorities and women in the job, but that doesn't mean it's mandatory. There's too much confusion about that these are somehow quotas.
They're not quotas.
It's
Affirmative
not
action
a
is not a
quota.
quota.
Please, everybody, get, and the politicians play it up. It's just a goal.
What is sexual harassment?
What is it?
Yeah, what does that mean?
God, lately I feel like I'm my subspecialty is sex in the workplace. I should say. I don't want to get further beyond that,
right.
but
because if you just say sex, we have a lot of viewers who are experts.
Right? Yeah, right. Everybody is, but it is getting to the point that I have seen more, and I represent employers, but I also represent on occasion individuals, usually men, who have been accused of harassment, who need their own lawyer because their employer doesn't want to represent them. And it's not funny. It ruins lives.
Well, what is
many
it? How do you
times
define
it's overplayed. and overdone and over exaggerated. How do you define it?
Right.
It's unwelcome sexual conduct and remarks in the workplace. That's as broad as I can get with it. Unwelcome.
How do you know whether it's unwelcome? How do you know until afterwards?
Well, you can be in trouble if it's not unwelcome, right? Because then it's harassment. If it's welcome, that's called dating, or whatever, or marriage.
Right.
It's a fine line then.
It's a very fine line, and some people, I've had situations where there's been a voluntary affair, and then somebody tries to break up.
Well,
and
we've
boom.
had here in New Jersey public officials accused of sexual harassment, and those lawsuits were settled with the state treasury paying out damages. Does that make sense for us, the viewing public, to pay for state officials' sexual proclivities and harassments?
If what he had done was beyond the scope of his employment, and there's a definition for that, the state shouldn't be paying for that.
Should not pay.
But
well,
that's a big interest.
But if it was in the scope of employment, why
other
would there
words,
be a settlement?
If it was something egregious, the state shouldn't be paying. If it's something, what we call a hostile work environment, where there are jokes made, sexual jokes and comments and innuendos and all those things, maybe. I don't know the facts of that case,
well,
other than I know they paid a lot of money.
In general, these lawsuits, the public school lawsuits, the sex harassment lawsuits, they add to the costs of doing business in this state. Is that what we want in this country?
No.
Maybe we need another show for this, because time is running out. Next time, we'll talk about what should government pay for and what should the employees pay for. This is Sam Rosenfarb, my guests Phil Stern, Paul Weiner for It's All About Money, and watch it. Don't let the greed get you. If you have any questions or comments about tonight's show, please call me or write to me, Sam Rosenfarb, 75 Livingston Avenue, Roseland, New Jersey, 07068, area code 973-535-1300. Thank you, gentlemen. Terrific.
Pleasure
Paul,
to be here.
Phil, thanks very much.